Step out of the vehicle. Hands where I can see them. The voice tore through the stillness of the night like thunder, echoing through the empty Georgia road. The silence shattered as flashing red and blue lights danced across the black SUV that had just been forced to pull over. Inside the vehicle, the man placed his hands on the steering wheel slowly. His face was composed, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of frustration. He hadn't broken any law. No speeding, no illegal turns, nothing. But the officers outside didn't seem to care. I said, "Get out of the car! Now!" The officer barked again, his words laced with aggression. A gun was already in his hand, aimed and ready, his stare cold and calculating. In their eyes, the man was nothing more than an easy target. A black man, alone, in the dead of night. But what they didn't know was that he wasn't just any man. One phone call from him, and their careers could be in ruins. Their ignorance would soon cost them dearly. Let's take you into the full story. The SUV moved quietly through the empty streets of a small Georgia town, the tires humming softly against the road. Streetlights flickered above, casting uneven shadows across the pavement. Behind the wheel sat David, a man of few words and deep thoughts. His hand rested gently on the steering wheel, his gaze steady. His face was calm, lined with the marks of time and experience. At 52, David still carried the strength and presence of a man who once led thousands of soldiers. He had just returned from Washington, where he'd spent hours at the Pentagon discussing national defense strategies. The stress had become routine, but tonight he wasn't thinking about work. He was thinking about home, about peace, about rest. Then he noticed it, a flicker of red in his rearview mirror, a police car. Its lights flashed wildly, reflecting off the rear window. David frowned, a familiar wave of weariness washing over him. This wasn't the first time he'd been pulled over for no reason. As a black man, he knew the routine all too well. He hadn't violated any traffic laws. His documents were all in order. And yet he knew what this was. He turned on his signal and gently eased the car to the shoulder of the road. Through the rearview mirror, he watched two officers step out. Both were white. One was short and heavy-set, with a close-cropped haircut. The other, taller, with a sharp face and cold, piercing eyes. David kept his hands on the wheel, visible, unmoving. He had trained others to do this exact thing: stay calm, stay still, give them no excuse. And now he had to follow his own advice. The short officer stomped up to the window and knocked harshly. David lowered it. A chill wind crept in, bringing with it the scent of damp asphalt and fog. "License and registration," the officer demanded without an ounce of respect. David looked him in the eye. "Can you tell me why I was pulled over?" he asked quietly. The officer smirked. "You didn't signal when you changed lanes. Now give me your papers." David felt his jaw tighten. That was a lie, plain and simple. But arguing wouldn't help. He slowly reached for his documents and handed them over. The officer snatched them and glanced at the name, David Carter, but clearly didn't recognize it. The taller officer stepped closer now, folding his arms and peering into the car. "Where are you coming from?" "I'm heading home," David replied calmly. The officer sneered, bending lower to look inside. "Is this your car?" "Yes." "You sure you didn't steal it?" the officer added with a smirk. David swallowed his anger. He was used to this. To some cops, a black man in a luxury car was automatically a suspect. "Step out of the car," the short one barked again. David didn't move. "Do I not have the right to ask why?" The officer leaned in so close David could smell the sour mix of coffee and stale cigarettes on his breath. "Because I said so," he growled. David's temper flared, but he kept his voice steady. "What does that mean?" The taller officer laughed. "It means you do what you're told. Don't make this harder than it has to be." David's grip on the wheel tightened. He had served his country for over 30 years, led men into war, faced real threats. But never, not once, had he felt so disrespected, so small, in the very land he fought to protect. Then came the chilling click of a gun. The stocky officer had drawn his weapon, pointing it directly at David. David looked at the barrel, unfazed but fully aware of the danger. He wasn't afraid, but he knew these men were just waiting for a reason to pull the trigger. One sudden move, one misread gesture, and he'd be another headline. Slowly, he raised his hands. "Get out of the car now!" the officer yelled again. "Patrick Wilson," David said, calmly reading the officer's badge. He stepped out, hands still raised. The cold air clung to his skin, but he hardly noticed. What he noticed was the way they looked at him, not as a human being, but like an animal. Cornered and trapped. The tall officer, Chris Miller, moved in closer, eyeing David with disgust. "Black guy in a fancy ride," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "You get it through welfare scams?" David remained silent. He knew it was bait. Miller shoved him. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" David steadied himself. "Don't touch me," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You giving us orders now?" Wilson sneered. "Who the hell do you think you are?" David looked him straight in the eye. "I'm a citizen, and I deserve to be treated like one." The officers laughed in disbelief. Wilson stepped forward and jabbed the gun into David's chest. "Get on your knees." David didn't move. "No." Wilson's smirk vanished. "I said, get down." "That's not a lawful command," David replied, staring into his eyes. Wilson's face twisted in rage. He lifted the gun and smashed the butt of it into David's head. David staggered, pain flaring in his skull, but he refused to fall. "Stubborn old man," Miller said, amused. Wilson growled and shoved him again, this time sending him to one knee. "There we go," Miller jeered. "Finally." David looked up, eyes steady. "I know who I am." That sentence struck harder than any blow. Wilson kicked him hard in the back, knocking him flat to the ground. David's face hit the rough pavement. Pebbles cut into his skin, but he didn't flinch. Miller leaned down and whispered in his ear, "Welcome to the real world." Wilson laughed. Maybe he thinks he's someone important. Maybe he did. And maybe, just maybe, they were about to find out exactly who he was. "David, what's wrong?" David glanced at the two laughing officers, completely unaware they had just taken a step into something far bigger than themselves. "I'm currently being detained by two local police officers," David said into his phone, each word deliberate, sharp like a blade. "Without any valid reason, they insulted me, used unlawful force, and searched my vehicle without a warrant." There was silence on the other end. Then General Anderson's voice came through, suddenly cold, tight with anger. "What are their names?" David looked up at the two officers, still oblivious to who he was speaking to. He raised his phone, snapped a photo of them, Wilson and Miller standing casually by his car, and sent it to the general. Miller noticed and frowned slightly. "Who are you calling?" David's eyes were piercing, his voice razor sharp. "Someone who can end your careers before the night is over." Wilson scoffed. "You serious?" But before David could respond, Wilson's radio crackled loudly, slicing through the tension. "Wilson Miller, you're detaining someone you have no right to. Release him immediately. That is an order." The smirks vanished. The laughter died. The weight of reality hit them like ice water. Wilson and Miller exchanged stunned glances, their arrogance crumbling in an instant. David remained seated on the ground, but now the power had shifted. He was the one in control. He slowly stood, dusting off his clothes, calm and composed. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small, dark blue card edged with gold. He held it up. The words on it were impossible to ignore. "Colonel David Carter, United States Army, Pentagon." Miller's face drained of color. Wilson, who moments ago had barked commands at David, now struggled to speak. To this is, Miller stammered, barely able to form the words. David stared at them in icy silence. We had a bit of a misunderstanding, Wilson finally offered, his voice shaky. David repeated his words slowly, each syllable hitting like a gavel. A misunderstanding. You didn't know who I was, he continued. So let me ask, if I hadn't been a colonel, if I had just been an ordinary black man, what would have happened? No one answered. He stepped closer. Instinctively, both men stepped back. If I wasn't an officer in the army, you would have thrown me to the ground, handcuffed me, dragged me to the station, maybe even made up charges to justify it, and I would have become another name on the long list of people abused by those who wear this uniform and forget what it stands for. Wilson shook his head. No, it's not like that. We were just doing our jobs. David gave a bitter smile. Jobs? You called me a welfare cheater. That's how you do your jobs? Miller lowered his eyes. He had no defense. David looked past them, as if seeing more than just this one moment. His voice grew deeper, steadier, worn by years of seeing the same injustice. This isn't just about me. It never is. How many times has this happened? How many others have been stopped, insulted, threatened, just because of the color of their skin? Not everyone has a general to call. Not everyone gets saved. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. And then, a new sound, a siren, another police car appeared. But this one was different. Internal affairs. The vehicle stopped, and from it stepped two officers and a stern-looking man wearing a badge that read, Chief Raymond Harper. Wilson and Miller straightened up, trying to look professional, but the panic in their eyes betrayed them. Chief Harper's gaze swept the scene. When he saw David's ID, his expression tightened. Then he turned to his officers. Do you two have any idea what you've just done? Wilson gulped. Sir, it was a misunderstanding. We didn't know who he was. Harper's voice cut like steel. It doesn't matter who he is. What matters is what you did. He nodded to the internal affairs officer, who pulled a device from his belt and hit play. The recording echoed in the night. Get out of the car. I don't need a reason to arrest someone like you. If you say one more word, this bullet will be the last thing you see. Harper's jaw tightened with every word. When the recording ended, he turned slowly. Are you insane? He barked. Your body cams recorded everything. Don't you dare try to excuse this. The two officers were silent, the truth undeniable. Harper turned to David, his voice quieter but filled with shame. Colonel Carter, on behalf of the department, I offer my deepest apology. David's gaze remained cold. Apology's not enough. I want to be certain these two never wear a badge again. Harper didn't hesitate. Wilson, Miller, you're suspended immediately. Wilson opened his mouth. Chief, please. Quiet, Harper snapped. You didn't just fail in your duty. You shamed this entire department. You are racists. You are abusers of power, and you're finished. Wilson's hands trembled. Miller looked like he might collapse, but David wasn't done. This isn't just about two men, he said calmly. This is about the system that let them act like this. I want a full investigation. Harper looked at him, then gave a slow, heavy nod. You'll have it, Colonel. The investigation began that same week. The footage from Wilson and Miller's body cameras showed everything. Every threat, every slur, every abuse. The police union tried to defend them at first, but the pressure from the public became overwhelming. Wilson and Miller were fired, but it didn't stop there. The scandal reached national headlines. More black citizens stepped forward with their own stories of being stopped, harassed, humiliated. A tidal wave of truth swept through the community. Chief Harper, realizing the scale of the problem, promised sweeping reforms. New hiring standards, better training, zero tolerance for discrimination. As for David, he declined interviews. He turned down talk shows and book deals. He wasn't looking for fame. He only wanted one thing: justice. Not just for himself, for everyone who didn't have a voice. And one quiet evening, as the Georgia sky glowed red with sunset, David drove once more down the same road where it all began. But this time, no guns, no shouting, no fear. Only a man who stood his ground and forced the world to see what it had long tried to ignore. A man who reminded them, power is not permission to do harm, and those who think they can act without consequences will learn that some mistakes can never be undone.